Let's move on to some other issues. Back to that rally we heard about today in Sydney. It's obviously been the subject of legal action for some time, but it went ahead in very small numbers. A number of people, though, were detained by the police, and the protester has been arrested.
Everyone, ladies and gentlemen, you need to step back. Justice for David Dungay. We will not stop until the guards are charged. Now for David Dungay. Charge the guards who killed David Dungay. Charge the guards who killed David Dungay now.
Protest organiser, I'm told, and 6 others. Sky News political editor Andrew Clennell joins me from Canberra. Also, Andrew, that was all very interesting today. I'm a bit interested to know what sort of fines they were eventually levied with.
Well, $1,000. So they got the publicity, but it'll cost them $1,000 each, Peter. So I don't know if it was worth it. Yeah, Mick Fuller warned about this on Sky News last week, that was exactly what was going to happen, and it did.
Yeah, I'm interested to know, you can get fined $1,600 in Victoria for fishing off a pier when you're not meant to in the middle of a COVID outbreak. So $1,000 seems pretty cheap to Victorians. Was there any extra fine levied on the organiser?
No, I don't believe so. So, I mean, it's a pretty hefty infringement, but I think the good news is this, and it shows the importance of police going to the courts on these matters, Peter. The time the Court of Appeal sanctioned a protest, there were thousands of people that showed up. Every time we've had this sort of circumstance where it's banned by the court, the fine's been enough of a deterrent for the numbers to be very greatly diminished, and of course that means much less of a virus risk. So it's very important any time there is talk of this sort of thing that the matter is taken to court, because I don't think this will be the last time, sadly.
And just before I move off this too, I'm told a number of the protesters ended up going to the New South Wales Parliament as guests of MPs after that thwarted rally. What do we know? Well,
David Shoebridge and Jenny Leong, the Green MPs, were at the rally. One of them escorted one of the protesters into Parliament, and then they came along with a 90,000 signature petition, apparently, around this case involving David Dungay at Long Bay Jail and the prison guards and his unfortunate death. So there's no doubt the Greens were probably not setting the best example, as they haven't all along, in terms of taking part in these protests. Of course, normal circumstances, no problem with the protest, but to encourage thousands onto the streets in this sort of environment at the moment, it's far from ideal. It's very risky.
Yeah, look, the Greens are nothing if not consistent with their disdain for rule of law. Let's go back to these issues in Victoria. The AMA, the Victorian AMA, they now want to see a royal commission into the handling of the pandemic by the Victorian government. I have to say, I don't think at all that the government's inquiry passed muster. It's a former judge. It's not a judicial inquiry. Do you think this is going to happen? A federal royal commission or a royal commission per se?
Well, I think a Royal Commission will eventually happen, but I'm thinking 2 years down the track, Peter. I mean, what we're dealing with at the moment is an emergency response. So it's not really... you're dealing with the mistakes now. It's too early to start inquiring into them.
No, but
when it occurs, I think Daniel Andrews, if he's still around, will be in immense trouble.
I think there's an important point to make. I would not agree with starting a Royal Commission now, because you would be diverting the resources of the government that should be fighting this pandemic. But I would be agreeing that you announce it so that there is preservation of evidence. What I would be concerned about now is they know it's gone to hell in a handcart in Victoria, and I would suspect a number of people involved in decisions around things like hotel quarantine will be pretty quick with a delete button and removing and shredding documents. That happens. It's happened in the past, and I would be calling on them to announce or commit to a Royal Commission at the very least, so that there is an order to preserve documents. I think that's incredibly important. Let's move to the issue of contact tracing. Interestingly, there's over 3,000 cases that remain untraced in Victoria. In New South Wales, admittedly a very small cohort, they had 17 cases the other day. There are just only two left that they now say are under investigation. It's obviously showing that New South Wales are more practised at this, aren't they, than Victoria?
Well, the results speak for themselves, and the stories that we've been running on Afternoon Agenda the last 3 days speak for themselves, which is people in Colac not receiving a test result for 9 and 10 days. This is clearly unacceptable. There's a study in The Lancet from Dutch scientists which shows that in order to thwart the virus, you need test results back within 1 to 2 days. And if you do that, you can get transmission down, they found, by 80%. So this is out of control. And if there is a harder lockdown in Victoria, it is primarily for this reason. And I don't accept the argument that they're just sort of overwhelmed, because they did 18,000 tests yesterday. New South Wales have been doing 10 to 20,000 every single day. So I just think there is a fundamental failure of government systems here, Peter, and it's putting Victoria at risk. It'll cost lives, and in fact, it's putting the entire nation at risk if it were to spread much further past Victoria. And it's just difficult to believe that it's such a ramshackle system down there, that the pathology labs apparently just aren't matched on computers with the health department, etc. There's all these sorts of administrative problems that people just can't get the results back. If they can't get the results back, they can't trace the contacts. In New South Wales, people are getting the results back within a day, sometimes the same day.
And what's extraordinary too, Victoria's a small state, big population, but a small state, so it hasn't even got the challenges of geography that somewhere like New South Wales or indeed WA has. So I just don't buy the excuses. And if you know the system's overwhelmed, Premier, why do you keep knocking, or certainly did keep knocking back the ADF? I'm going to have a word in a moment to a tech expert, but you know, you're in and around Parliament House tonight. Is there anyone there still spruiking that COVID app? Because it's turned out to be an absolute lemon when it comes to tracking these cases.
Well, I'm actually in Sydney tonight, Peter. Sorry about that, but I was in Canberra last week. I'll be there soon. But I know, well, the Prime Minister keeps mentioning it, and his friend, the Minister, Stuart Roberts, in charge of it. But unfortunately, it doesn't have much credibility. And the good thing is that a lot of outlets like restaurants and pubs and so forth are taking making sure people sign and put their names down. Almost every venue I go to is doing that, and thank goodness, because this thing's an absolute flop. Nevertheless, the PM was still mentioning again, only briefly this time yesterday, they've got to do more to get the thing to work. For a start, the thing that you've got to be in contact with someone 15 minutes, where you can get it from a cough or a breath of air. You don't need to be near someone for that long. So that was a fault. But also this design fault in terms of if your phone's locked. Well, if you're walking around with a phone, you don't want to call someone accidentally, so it usually is locked. Now, they say it still sort of works, just not as effective, but I think there's a lot more to come on that saga, and we need some more information about it. If it doesn't work, just tell us it doesn't work and we need to use other methods.
Hey, just quickly before we go, you know, the usual dance of the seven veils, and that image is terrible to even contemplate. Clive Palmer talking about running in the Queensland election. We know he's been charged with fraud and other offences by the regulator ASIC. Why on earth is he standing, and will he be even taken seriously?
Well, I don't know what the law is in Queensland, but in a lot of other jurisdictions, if you're charged with an offence which carries a 5-year penalty, or probably it's due to conviction, actually. You have to be convicted, then you can't stand. But, you know, I don't think there's much hope of him or any of his people being elected to Parliament, but we know that with the money he puts behind these ads, he could have a huge effect. And Deb Frecklington probably should be the person who's celebrating, because it's likely that, like in the federal campaign, he would actually kind of push people away from Labor, so it could benefit her. But we know he'll probably have some impact in their advertising game. Having said that, Anastasia Palaszczuk shutting the borders, and then I guess it's a difficult word to use in this context, but the luck she had in Victoria taking off will significantly enhance her political prospects, I think. Yeah,
the biggest campaigner for Anastasia Palaszczuk has been Dan Andrews in the last few months, and that, I reckon, will get her over the line.